Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever done something kind for someone who did not deserve your kindness? Not because you wanted anything from them, not because you had forgiven them completely, but simply because you were the kind of person who could not look away when someone needed help? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. Elliot Graves had spent 4 years building an empire on the assumption that he could outwork every consequence of every decision he had ever made. He was wrong. The morning he collapsed on the floor of his 39th floor office, his body simply stopped cooperating with his schedule. And the woman who saved his life was the last person on earth he had any right to call. His ex-wife. The one he lost because he chose the company over everything else that mattered. The one who, it turned out, had been carrying a secret for 4 years that was about to change every single thing he thought he understood about the life he had built without her. Some stories begin with a choice. Some begin with a mistake. This one begins with a heartbeat. Specifically, a heartbeat that stopped doing what heartbeats are supposed to do. In an office on the 39th floor of a building in Manhattan, on a Tuesday morning in November, while the man whose chest it lived in was reviewing quarterly projections and ignoring the tightening that had been building for 3 weeks. If you have ever watched someone lose everything they actually wanted by holding too tightly to everything they thought they needed, this story is going to find something in you. And if you have ever been the person who stayed strong, stayed silent, and built something beautiful out of the pieces someone else left behind, this one is especially for you. Before we go in, one ask from me to you. If this story reaches something true in you today, right? She saved more than his life in the comments. Let this family know you are here. Now, let us begin. Elliot Graves had not always been a man who chose work over people. There had been an earlier version of him. Younger, less certain, more willing to be surprised by things, who had understood instinctively that the point of building something was to have people to share it with. That version of Elliot had proposed to a woman on a rooftop in Brooklyn on a cold November evening with a ring he had saved for 8 months to buy and a speech he had rehearsed enough times that it came out completely natural. That version had meant every word. Then the company had grown, and the growth had required things. Time first, then attention, then the particular emotional availability that a marriage requires, and that a scaling company systematically consumes until there is nothing left to offer the person waiting at home. He was 51 years old now. Graves Capital had operations in 12 countries. He had been on the cover of 3 business publications in the past 18 months. His name was used in business school case studies as a model of disciplined growth strategy. He had a communications team, a personal trainer, a chef, a driver, and an assistant named Paul who managed his schedule with the precision of someone running a small government. He had not been to a doctor in 3 years. He had not been in a relationship since the divorce. He had not allowed himself to think too carefully about either of those facts. The divorce had been 4 years ago. Not dramatic. That was almost the worst part of it. No single catastrophic event. No affair. No betrayal. No identifiable moment that either of them could point to and say that was when it ended. Just the slow, grinding erosion of a marriage that had been neglected for long enough that by the time they both acknowledged it was over, the acknowledgement itself was almost a relief. Naomi had said, on the last evening they spent together in the apartment that had been their home, that she did not hate him. She said she had loved him completely, and that loving him had cost her something she could not get back, and that she needed to leave while she still recognized herself. He had not argued. He had sat on the couch while she finished packing, and he had looked at the apartment they had built together and felt the specific, hollowing grief of a man who understood too late what he had been doing. She had taken a cab to her sister's apartment that night. He had gone into the office the next morning. Because that was what he knew how to do. Dr. Naomi Graves. She had kept his name, not for him, but because changing it required a kind of administrative energy she had not had at the time, and because she had built her career under it. And because it was, she told herself, simply a name, ran the cardiology unit at Mercy General Hospital with the same quiet, complete authority she brought to everything. She was 34 years old. She had finished her residency 2 years after the divorce, completed her fellowship in interventional cardiology, and built a reputation at Mercy General that had nothing to do with who she had once been married to. Her colleagues knew her as precise, warm, occasionally fierce in the way of someone who believed completely in what they were doing and did not tolerate anything that compromised it. Her patients knew her as the doctor who explained things fully, who sat down before speaking, who treated the person and not just the condition. She had loved medicine before she loved Elliot. That was the thing that had sustained her through the years of training, through the exhaustion of residency, through the divorce, through everything that came after. The work had always been hers. No one had given it to her. No one could take it. After the divorce, she had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the hospital. The second bedroom had been a home office for approximately 6 weeks. Then it had become something else entirely. Her daughter's name was Lily. She was 4 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw and a laugh that arrived at full volume without warning and a habit of narrating everything she was doing in the present tense that her mother found simultaneously exhausting and the best thing she had ever heard. Naomi had discovered she was pregnant 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She had sat with that information for 3 days. She had thought about calling him. She had thought about it carefully and completely, the way she approached every difficult decision, and she had arrived at a conclusion that had cost her something significant and which she had made peace with across 4 years of raising Lily alone. Elliot had been given every opportunity to be present in their marriage and had chosen his company instead. She was not going to ask him to be present in a child's life by obligation. If he was going to be Lily's father, he was going to choose it fully, with his whole self, or he was not going to be it at all. She had raised her daughter. She had not told him. She had lived with that decision every day and had not regretted it, and had not felt entirely at peace with it either, because some decisions are simply the least wrong available option and not the clean resolution anyone actually wants. Lily did not ask about her father yet. She would. Naomi knew what she would say when she did. She had not yet figured out the part that came after. The tightening in Elliot's chest had started 3 weeks before the Tuesday in November. He had identified it as stress. He had been managing stress for 30 years. He knew what it felt like, and he knew how to work through it. Longer hours, harder focus, the particular discipline of pushing past discomfort that had built everything he owned. He was wrong about what it was. Paul found him on the floor at 9:47 in the morning. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. The preliminary assessment in the ambulance identified a significant cardiac event, the specific clinical language that translated, in plain terms, to, the heart has been sending warnings that were ignored for long enough that it stopped asking and simply acted. Mercy General's emergency cardiology unit received him at 10:12. The attending physician on call that morning was Dr. Naomi Graves. She was reviewing a patient chart at the nursing station when the paramedic report came through the radio. 51-year-old male, cardiac event, no prior documented cardiac history, name Elliot Graves. She had read the name twice. Then she had set the chart down and walked to the bay doors. When the gurney came through, she looked at his face for 1 full second. Then she looked at the monitor readings and the paramedic beside her and said clearly and without any hesitation, "Let us move." She worked for 40 minutes, not as his ex-wife, as the interventional cardiologist on call, the one who knew exactly what the readings meant and exactly what needed to happen, and who performed the procedure with the focused precision of someone who had trained for this specific kind of moment for years. She stabilized him. When it was over, she stood in the corridor outside the bay for approximately 90 seconds. Then she went back to work. Elliot woke up in a private room on the 4th floor of Mercy General Hospital at 4 in the afternoon. The ceiling was white. The light was the specific flat light of hospital rooms that has no relationship to time of day. There was a monitor beside the bed and in 4 in his left arm, and a quiet that was completely unlike any quiet in his regular life. He lay there for a moment taking inventory of where he was and what had happened and what that meant. Then the door opened. She wore a white coat over dark scrubs. Her natural hair was pulled back. She had a tablet in one hand, and she was reading something on it as she came through the door, and she looked up when she heard him move, and their eyes met across the room. For years, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she moved to the monitor with the professional efficiency of someone who had decided, clearly and completely, how this interaction was going to go. His heart rate, she told him. His blood pressure. What had happened and why. What the procedure involved. What the recovery required. She delivered all of it in the clear, measured language of a physician briefing a patient, and he lay there and listened, and watched her face and understood that she was being professional because professionalism was the only version of this she was going to allow. When she finished, he said her name. She looked at him. He said, "You saved my life." She said, "I did my job." She said it without coldness and without warmth, just as a fact. Then she told him that his cardiologist would be in to see him in the morning and that he needed rest and that someone from his office had been notified. She moved toward the door. He said her name again. She paused at the door without turning around. He said, "Thank you, not for doing your job, for not walking out of the bay when you saw it was me." A pause. She said, "I do not walk away from patients, Elliot." She said it quietly. Then she walked out. He stared at the ceiling. Outside the closed door, in the corridor, she stood still for 10 seconds with her hand flat against the wall. Then she walked back to the nursing station. His assistant Paul had told no one except Elliot's personal attorney and his CFO. The communications team was on standby. No press statement had been released. Elliot had been clear, through Paul, that he wanted the hospitalization kept private for as long as possible. Naomi was aware of all of this and said nothing to anyone. She checked on him twice the following day with the same professional distance she had established in the first visit. She answered his questions about his recovery timeline and his medications and his required lifestyle adjustments with the complete, patient thoroughness she brought to every patient conversation. She did not ask how he was in the broader sense. He did not ask about her life. On the third day, she came in the morning and he was sitting up and he looked better and he said, before she could begin the clinical update, "How are you, Naomi?" She looked at him. He said, "Not as your patient. How are you?" She sat down in the chair beside the bed, which she had not done in any of the previous visits, and she said she was well, that the work was good, that her life was full. He asked if she was happy. She said that was a complicated question. He said he had been thinking, lying in the hospital bed with no schedule and no phone and no meetings, that he had a great many complicated questions he had spent 4 years not asking. She looked at him carefully. She said, "You should focus on your recovery, Elliot." He said, "I know, but I would like to talk to you. When you are ready. Not as my doctor. As the person I should have talked to more when I had the chance." She did not say yes. She did not say no. She said she would think about it. Then she completed her clinical update and left. In the corridor, she stood for a moment and thought about a 4-year-old girl who had her father's jaw and no knowledge of his existence, and she understood that the conversation Elliot was asking for was going to become, whether she was ready for it or not, considerably more complicated than he knew. He was discharged after 8 days. The discharge instructions were thorough and the lifestyle modifications were significant, and his personal cardiologist, a man named Dr. Rees who had been treating Elliot's colleagues for years and who was quietly horrified that Elliot had gone 3 years without a checkup, delivered them with the specific emphasis of someone who needed his patient to actually listen this time. Elliot listened. He went home to the penthouse and looked at the schedule Paul had prepared for his return and did something he had never done before. He told Paul to clear 2 weeks. Not to reschedule, to clear. Paul said nothing for a moment. Then he said he would handle it. Elliot spent the first 3 days doing what the discharge instructions required, resting, eating what the nutritionist prescribed, taking the medications at the correct times. He had always been disciplined when given a clear framework. Recovery had a clear framework. He applied himself to it. On the 4th day, he called Naomi. Not the hospital. Her personal number, which he still had from 4 years ago and which had, it turned out, not changed. She answered on the 3rd ring. He said he was following discharge instructions and that he was calling because he wanted to ask if she would have coffee with him. Not at the hospital. Somewhere ordinary. He said he understood if she said no and that he would not ask again if she preferred. She said she had 45 minutes on Thursday at 11. He said Thursday at 11 was perfect. She chose the coffee shop, a small place 3 blocks from the hospital that she went to between rounds on the days she had time, where the owner knew her order and the chairs were comfortable and nothing about the space required performance from either of them. She was already there when he arrived. He looked different from the hospital, not healthier exactly. The recovery was still visible in the careful way he moved, the slight deliberateness of someone who had been reminded that their body had limits, but present in a way he had not always been, like he had put something down. He sat across from her and ordered coffee, and they talked. Not about the marriage, not about the divorce, not about what had happened between them or what it had cost either of them. They talked about her work. She told him about a patient she had treated the previous week, a 43-year-old man who had come in convinced he was too young to have a cardiac event and had left understanding that the body does not negotiate with denial. Elliot listened without deflecting. She noticed that. He told her about the 2 weeks he was taking, that it was the first time in 30 years he had cleared his schedule without a reason he could show to investors. She said that was either progress or a near-death experience doing what therapy could not. He laughed. The laugh was genuine and slightly surprised. The way a laugh is when someone says something that lands exactly right. She said, "You are different." He said, "I had 8 days with no phone and a lot of ceiling to look at." She said, "Did the ceiling help?" He said it showed him what was actually important when everything else was removed. She looked at him over her coffee. She said she was glad he was recovering. She said it genuinely. He could hear the difference between professional warmth and actual warmth, and this was the second one. He said, "I want to be honest with you about something." She waited. He said that he had spent 4 years telling himself the divorce was the right outcome, and that he had made peace with it, and that he had come to understand that making peace with something and being at peace with it were entirely different states, and he had been confusing them for years. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Elliot, there is something I need to tell you." The coffee shop was warm around them. The owner moved behind the counter. Outside, November moved through the street. She told him about Lily. She said it clearly and completely, and without softening it into something easier to receive. She had been pregnant when the divorce was finalized. She had made a decision to raise their daughter without requiring his participation because participation required his genuine choice, and she had not been willing to use a child to extract that choice from him. Their daughter was 4 years old. Her name was Lily. She had his jaw. Elliot did not speak for a long time. She watched him process it with the steady attention of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times and understood that the reality of it was going to be different from every rehearsal. He said, "I have a daughter." She said, "Yes." He said, "For 4 years." She said, "Yes." He looked at the table, then at her. His expression was not anger. It was the specific devastation of a man understanding the full shape of what his choices had cost. Not just the marriage, not just the years, but a child who had grown 4 years of mornings and evenings and firsts without him knowing she existed. He said, "I would like to meet her." Naomi said, "I know, but not yet. Not until I am certain that meeting her is something you are going to continue, not something you are going to do once and then return to your schedule." He said he understood. She said she needed him to understand it completely. He said he did. Midpoint question for you. If someone you once loved came back asking for a second chance, would the version of them that showed up be enough, or would you need to see who they were when it cost them something? His return to Graves' capital after the 2-week absence was handled with the particular careful choreography of a communications team managing a narrative. The press statement described a brief medical procedure and a full recovery. It was accurate as far as it went. The board had been briefed privately. The investors had received a letter from the CFO. The message was, "Everything is fine, the company is stable, nothing has changed." What had changed was Elliot. Not visibly. Not in the boardroom, where he returned with the same precise authority and the same command of detail that his board expected, but in the small margins of his days. The way he left the office at 6 instead of 9. The way he stopped scheduling breakfast meetings on weekends. The way he started calling Paul by his first name in a way that was noticeably different from before. His attorney, a man named Whitfield who had been with him for 20 years, noticed. Whitfield requested a private lunch 3 weeks after Elliot returned to the office and delivered his concern with the direct, unembellished efficiency of someone who had earned the right to say difficult things plainly. He said he had heard Elliot was seeing Dr. Graves. Elliot said they had coffee. Whitfield said the board was aware that Dr. Graves had been the attending physician during the hospitalization. He said there were questions, quiet ones, but real ones, about whether the dynamic was appropriate, whether it created a perception issue, whether reconnecting with an ex-wife under these circumstances was something that required careful management. Elliot said, "What kind of management?" Whitfield said that a man in Elliot's position needed to be thoughtful about how personal decisions intersected with professional optics. He said, "Dr. Graves was a gifted physician, but that their history was public enough that the combination could generate a narrative the company did not need. Elliot listened to all of it. Then he said, "Thank you, Whitfield. I will think about it." He did not think about it, but he also did not say what needed to be said. Naomi noticed the shift the way she noticed everything, precisely, without announcing it. He had called twice a week since the coffee. Brief calls, the kind that were building something carefully. He had not pushed for more than she offered. She had found herself, gradually, and with the specific caution of someone who has been here before, looking forward to them. Then the calls became slightly shorter, the energy in them slightly more managed. She let it go for 1 week. Then she said it directly. She said, "Something changed. Between last week and this week. I can hear it." He was quiet. She said, "Elliot, I am not going to do this with you again. The version of you that was on the phone the week before last, that was the person I was beginning to trust. This version is the person I divorced." He said Whitfield had raised concerns about optics. She said she understood. She said she had expected something like that. She said she was not asking him to choose between her and his company because she had been that choice before and she was not available to be that choice again. She said, "What I am asking is simpler than that. I am asking whether you are going to let the people around you manage who you are allowed to care about. Because if the answer is yes, then we should stop here before Lily meets you." The mention of Lily landed heavily. He said, "No. The answer is no." She said, "Then act like it. Not to me. In the rooms where it costs you something." She said she would be watching. He said, "I know." The Graves Capital Annual Investor Conference was the most significant internal event of the company's calendar. 400 investors, board members, senior staff, and industry partners. A full day of presentations and panels, and the particular performance of institutional confidence that these events required. Elliot had presented at 11 of them. He knew the format completely. He changed the closing remarks the morning of. Not with his communications team. Not with Whitfield. He sat in his office at 7 in the morning with a legal pad and wrote what he actually wanted to say, and then he read it once and did not change it. When the formal presentations ended and the floor opened for his closing address, Elliot stood at the podium and delivered the first 11 minutes exactly as his communications team had prepared. The company's performance, the growth strategy, the international expansion, all of it accurate and polished and exactly what the room expected. Then he set the prepared remarks aside. He said he wanted to say something that was not in the document. The room adjusted. He said that the past 2 months had taught him something that 30 years of building a company had not. He said that the collapse in November had stripped away every constructed version of himself and left him with something much simpler, a clear understanding of what and who actually mattered. He said he had a daughter. The room was very still. He said her name was Lily and she was 4 years old, and he had not known she existed until recently, and that he understood the responsibility of that in a way that was going to change how he spent his time going forward. He said the company would continue to be run well. He said it would also no longer be the only thing. He said the woman who had saved his life in November was the same woman he had failed to fully show up for when they were married. He said her name. He said she was a physician at Mercy General, and that she was extraordinary, and that he was going to spend whatever time she gave him proving he understood the difference between the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. He said he was telling the room this not to manage a narrative, but to end one. The reactions were everything and nothing. 3 board members requested calls with Whitfield the following morning. 2 investors sent emails that were warm and human and surprising. The financial press had 3 paragraphs on the speech by the following afternoon. Naomi read the coverage that evening after Lily was asleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone and read what he had said and felt something complicated move through her. Not purely warm, not purely certain, but real. The specific complexity of a woman who has protected herself and her child for 4 years, receiving public proof that the person she once loved had finally chosen to be seen. She did not call him that night. She waited until morning. When he answered, she said, "You said her name." He said, "Yes." She said, "In front of 400 people." He said, "Yes." She said, "Come over Saturday morning. Lily has soccer at 9. You can watch." He said he would be there. She said, "Elliot." She pauses. "She is going to ask you questions. 4-year-olds ask everything." He said, "I know. I am ready." She said, "We will see." But she was already smiling when she hung up. 6 months later, Elliot Graves was a different kind of man. Not transformed. That was not how real change worked, and he had learned enough to stop pretending otherwise. He still arrived at the office early. He still ran the company with the same precision and demand that had built it. He still had days where the old habits reasserted themselves, and Paul had to remind him gently that he had a 6 o'clock commitment that was not negotiable. The 6 o'clock commitment was Lily's bedtime. He had learned her routines the way he learned everything that mattered, with focused, patient attention. He knew she wanted 2 stories, not one, and that the second one had to be told rather than read, and that she had a specific stuffed rabbit named Gerald who had to be present and correctly positioned before sleep was even discussed. He had learned that she asked questions the way her mother did, directly, without preamble, with the expectation of a complete answer. She had asked him once, on a Saturday morning after soccer while they were eating the specific breakfast sandwiches she had decided were mandatory post-soccer food, why he had not been there before. He had looked at Naomi across the kitchen. Naomi had looked back at him steadily. "This one is yours," her expression said. He had told Lily, in the careful, honest language of someone talking to a 4-year-old about something true, that he had not known she was there, and that the moment he found out he came as fast as he could, and that he was not going anywhere. Lily had considered this seriously. Then she had said, "Okay," and returned to her breakfast sandwich. Naomi had turned back to the stove, but he had seen her shoulders drop slightly. The specific release of a woman who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, and has just watched someone else pick up part of the weight. He still got things wrong. He still sometimes answered emails during dinner before catching himself. He still occasionally defaulted to solving problems instead of sitting inside them. Naomi called him on it every time, without drama, with the precise directness that had always been her signature. He was learning. One evening he arrived at the apartment after a long day to find Lily already asleep and Naomi at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a patient file she was reviewing. He sat down across from her without announcing himself and poured a glass from the open bottle and opened his own laptop. They worked in companionable silence for 40 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "You stayed." He said, "Where else would I be?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached across the table and set her hand on top of his. He turned his hand over and held it. Neither of them said anything else. Through the baby monitor on the counter, the soft sound of Lily breathing in the next room filled the kitchen. That was enough. Naomi Graves saved his life because that was who she was. Not because she wanted him back. Not because she had forgiven everything. Not because the love she once had for him had been waiting quietly all those years for the right moment to resurface. She saved him because she was the kind of doctor and the kind of woman who did not walk away from someone who needed help. What happened after was not a reward for that. It was a choice, made slowly, carefully, with the full awareness of everything it had cost before and everything it could cost again. Made by a woman who had raised a child alone and built a career alone and kept herself whole alone and who decided, with her eyes completely open, that this version of him, the one who cleared his schedule and showed up to soccer and sat with a 4-year-old's hard questions and said her name in front of 400 people, was worth the risk of trusting again. He did not deserve that trust automatically. He earned it, one Saturday morning at a time. Final question for you. Is there someone in your life you saved, not from a medical emergency, but from themselves, from their worst choices, from the version of them that was slowly disappearing? And did they ever truly understand what that cost you? Leave your answer below. This conversation belongs to all of us. If this story found something real in you today, share it with someone who needs it. One share. It costs nothing and means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.